Let death and exile and every other thing which appears dreadful be daily before your eyes, but most of all, death. And you will never think of anything mean, nor will you desire anything extravagantly. That's the 21st chapter of the Enchiridion by Epictetus. There is a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker, and he wrote in his book, The Denial of Death, that we are gods who shit. I love that description. We are gods who shit. So what does that mean? Well, when we think of ourselves, there's like this juxtaposition of two very different conceptions. On the one hand, we think of ourselves as inhabiting this infinite, immortal, unbounded world of ideas, where we identify with our ideas and our thoughts. We are thinking things, thinking beings, and thoughts themselves don't seem like they have limits. And we're just thinking about the concepts involved in thoughts and the relations involved with thoughts and the myriad different combinations of creative ideas that might not even ever occur to anybody. We're thinking about these kinds of limitless, unbounded, completely immortal things. And when we think about ourselves as inhabiting that world, that sort of limited, immortal world of ideas, we think of ourselves as having the properties of that world. We think of ourselves as being limitless and immortal as well. So that's one way that we think of ourselves. But there's another way we think of ourselves too. So I talked about this before, but one time I was longboarding and I fractured my elbow. I thought I was looking super cool. I had my briefcase there. I had just left a meeting that I was running. And then next thing I know, I'm on the ground. My elbow really hurts. My wrist hurts. I'm thinking I thought my wrist was broken, right? My head really hurt because I smashed the ground. And then I had to get up, drive myself to urgent care, get some x-rays done, and turned out that my elbow was fractured. And that was a painful, literally a painful reminder of the fact that I'm made out of flesh and bones and tendons and other things that can break and which will eventually decay and die. And if put in the ground, will be food for worms and other different types of animals. That is so different than thinking of ourselves as the inhabitants, as the sort of natural inhabitants of this immortal, limitless world of ideas. And that juxtaposition can be kind of painful. It's kind of uncomfortable. And so that's what Becker was thinking about when he talked about us being gods who shit. There's this godlike part that exists in the world of ideas, the limitless, immortal world of ideas. Then there's the who shits part, where we're thinking about the very real, physical, animal parts of our process of incorporating nutrients and then excreting it. And according to Becker, what we do is we spend a lot of time working to resolve this juxtaposition, trying to manage this juxtaposition between these two ways of conceiving of ourselves in a way that doesn't hurt so bad. So what he thought we did was that we would engage in something called an immortality project. So imagine that I really care about being a teacher, or I really care about being a good brother, or a good father, or a good husband, or whatever else. What I'm doing there is I'm saying, I am this thing. I am this role. I play this role. And you're conceiving of yourself as this role. And roles are ideas, right? Roles are ideas. When we think about what a brother is or a teacher is, we're talking about this thing that interacts conceptually with other parts of these larger enduring structures, these social structures that include different kinds of roles. So teacher interacts with students in the context of schools, right? And that whole structure is going to survive way longer than me. So if I can identify as this kind of role and say this role is me, then what I'm able to do is kind of grab a little bit of immortality for myself. So Becker called that an immortality project. Another kind of immortality project is if I engage in a certain project I think it's going to be enduring beyond my own death. So when I write a book, I haven't written a book, but if I were to go write a book, what I might be thinking is I want this book to succeed because this book can succeed and it can extend beyond my own physical body and be talked about by people and last for a long time. And then it's almost as if I am succeeding in that way. I am achieving the immortality of my works. If I form a company or I join a company and I'm thinking like I'm part of this company or this company is a manifestation of me, now it's the case that this company is my immortality project. This company is my project of pursuing immortality. And you can see how it can get very dangerous, because now it's like, okay, if my book doesn't succeed because of something you did, or if your company and my company are fighting against each other, our immortality is at stake. It's not just like, my company is at stake. It's like my company is my attempt to become immortal. So like, you better get out of my way because I'm fighting for my immortality. So that's Becker. After Becker, there was a theory in experimental psychology called terror management theory. And the terror management theorists kind of developed Becker's theory a little bit farther. So one thing that they said was that, when you're driving down the street, you see a bad car accident, there's a stretcher, there's an ambulance, there's a dead body. You're going to try to distract yourself or rationalize it. You might think, well, they're probably a bad driver. Or you might think to yourself, well, death is a long way off for me. Or you might just turn on the radio or change the subject or do something to drive those thoughts out of your mind. So that's known as a proximal defense, these kinds of distractions or rationalizations that we give. There's also distal defenses, and these distal defenses involve something called the cultural anxiety buffer, where there's two different things that we do. One thing is cultural self-esteem maintenance. We're doing that. We're emphasizing the extent to which we are fulfilling the roles that we have chosen from our society. So I'm thinking like, I'm a very good teacher. And we engage in distal defenses when we have we see a death and then there's like a delay. So these thoughts are not really consciously in our minds, but they're kind of back there in our unconscious. Another thing we do as part of this cultural anxiety buffer is something called cultural worldview defense. And we're engaged in that. What we're doing is we're saying, I'm going to defend my worldview and disparage other worldviews. And that's actually been studied experimentally. So they do, they'll sort of induce these unconscious thoughts of death using a subliminal death stimulus where they flash the word death very quickly, and then they'll put people in an experimental condition, and they'll be more likely to, disparage other cultures and support their own than if you use a neutral word like field in the stimulus. Or if you have, like I said earlier, you can have an explicit mentioning of death plus a delay or a distraction. All right. So why am I telling you all this? Why am I talking to you about terror management theory and Ernest Becker? The reason why I'm telling you this is because there is a huge contrast between what the terror management theorists are describing and what Epictetus is recommending. So what the terror management theorists are describing and what Ernest Becker was describing is an attitude towards death where when we're engaged in dealing with death, we're trying to avoid it. We're trying to run away from it. We're trying to distract ourselves from it when we're engaged in these proximal defenses, or rationalize ourselves away from it when we're engaged in proximal defenses. When we're engaged in these distal defenses, what we're trying to do is also protect ourselves from it and run away from it because we're trying to say, oh no, we're trying to emphasize conceptions of ourselves that preserve our immortality. When we're thinking about these I fill this role, and this role is part of this enduring immortal meaning structure, or this company is a manifestation of me, and this company could be immortal, etc. And what Epictetus is saying is that you shouldn't do that. Epictetus is saying, instead of trying to have your attitude towards death be one of running away, I'll just read it, let death and exile and every other thing which appears dreadful be daily before your eyes. He's saying to look at it, right? Now, this seems like a much more successful strategy for a couple of reasons. First one is that you can't run away from death. Like life, even if death gets life gets an entire lifetime of a head start, death is still going to catch up with you by the end. It's just going to happen. You're not going to make it out of this alive. So it's kind of a useless project to think that you can escape death or cheat it. It's just not going to work. But on the other hand, we can think about what kind of life we're living. Do you want to live a life with a dishonest attitude towards death where all we're doing is we're just trying to hide from it? Or where we say, I'm going to take it head on and engage in what the Stoics would call negative visualization, where we say, I'm going to visualize death. I'm going to keep this disturbing aspect of reality that is non-negotiable in the forefront of my mind, at least once a day. And once I do that, it's going to help me reorient myself towards life. So not only am I going to become better at thinking about death, and I'm not going to be so afraid of it because I'll have lots of practice of reckoning with it. On the other hand, when I go through my life, I'm not going to have so many extravagant thoughts. Are you really going to be drooling over the next iPhone when you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to die someday, and I need to figure out how to live in the short amount of time that I have left? Are you really going to be engaging in, so he talks about, think anything mean. So like just petty gossip, like infighting. Are you really going to be spending so much time thinking, oh, this person used the wrong word to describe something and they did it unintentionally, but it was deemed to be offensive by somebody? Like, are you really going to spend so much time worrying about things like that when you've been thinking about the fact that you're going to die? The answer is probably not. You're going to, make something, like do something. You're going to be inclined to pick which things you think are actually important and then pursue them. Right. So that's the lesson of this 21st chapter of the Enchiridion by Epictetus. Instead of spending your whole life running from death, take it head on. Spend some time visualizing it, thinking about it, understanding that it's going to happen, and then live your life in a new way as a result of that. Live your life in a way where you're not just constantly thinking about these petty things that you don't really think are that important. So that's what Epictetus is inviting us to do. So I'm gonna read this one more time, and then we'll send you on your way. Let death and exile and every other thing which appears dreadful be daily before your eyes, but most of all, death. And you will never think of anything mean, nor will you desire anything extravagantly.